The producer leaned back in his chair, looked at Eric Clapton across the mixing desk and said, "The problem is that nobody under 30 knows who you are anymore. You're a legacy act. We need to modernize you, or we're wasting each other's time." Clapton listened to all of this without expression. Then he said, "I think we're already wasting each other's time." He stood up, picked up his jacket, and walked out of the studio. What happened in the 18 months that followed that conversation produced one of the most commercially successful and critically respected records of Clapton's career. But, to understand why, you have to understand what was said in that studio in January 1994, and what it revealed about two fundamentally different understandings of what music was for. The producer's name was Marcus Hale. He was 31 years old in January 1994, and he had spent the previous 3 years accumulating a track record in popular music that was, by any commercial measure, extraordinary. 14 top 10 records, 3 Grammy nominations, a client list that read like a map of the contemporary music landscape. He had developed across those 3 years a working methodology that was efficient and results-oriented and had proven itself repeatedly. He identified what the market wanted, he shaped the artist's output toward that target, and he delivered product that sold. He was very good at this. He was also, by January 1994, sufficiently confident in his own judgment that he had stopped clearly distinguishing between what he was good at and what he understood. What he did not understand was Eric Clapton. The meeting had been arranged by a mutual contact who had believed, with genuine optimism, that a collaboration between Hale's commercial instincts and Clapton's established audience might produce something interesting. Clapton had agreed to the meeting with the open-minded pragmatism of a man who had been in the music industry long enough to know that useful collaborations sometimes emerged from unlikely starting points. He arrived at the studio in Los Angeles on a Tuesday morning in January with no fixed agenda and a willingness to hear what Hale had to say. Hale had a great deal to say. He had prepared, with the thoroughness of a man who believed in preparation, an analysis of Clapton's recent commercial performance, streaming numbers, demographic data, radio play statistics broken down by age group and market segment. He walked Clapton through these figures with the confidence of a doctor delivering a diagnosis, explaining at each stage what the numbers indicated and what they implied for the direction of future work. The analysis was accurate. The numbers were real. The conclusion Hale drew from them, that Clapton needed to fundamentally reshape his sound and his image to remain commercially viable, was delivered with the certainty of someone who had confused commercial viability with artistic worth so many times and for so long that the distinction had ceased to exist for him. He said, "The problem is that nobody under 30 knows who you are anymore." He said, "You're a legacy act." He said, "We need to modernize you or we're wasting each other's time." Clapton sat across the mixing desk and listened to all of this without changing his expression. He had been in the music industry since he was 17 years old. He had been called many things across those decades: genius, has-been, god, sellout, legend, relic, and he had learned through long experience that the labels people applied to him said more about their own relationship to music than about anything he was actually doing. He listened to Hale the way you listen to someone who is saying something confidently incorrect, with patience and without the energy required to correct it. When Hale finished, Clapton said, "I think we're already wasting each other's time." He stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walked out of the studio, through the reception area, and out into the January Los Angeles morning, and he got into the car that was waiting for him, and he went back to his hotel. He did not call Hale. He did not send a follow-up message through his management. He did not engage with any of the machinery of the near collaboration that had just been terminated in a recording studio on a Tuesday morning. The meeting was over. He was done with it. What he was not done with was the question that Hale's analysis had, despite itself, placed in front of him. Not the question Hale thought he was asking, not the commercial question, not the demographic question, not the question of how to modernize a legacy act for a market that had moved on. Clapton had no interest in that question, and he knew it was not his question to answer. The question that stayed with him was a different one, quieter and more personal. What did he actually want to make next? He had been performing and recording for more than 30 years. He had made blues records and rock records and pop records and acoustic records. He had worked with producers who understood him and producers who did not. He had made records that sold enormously and records that were commercially modest and records that landed somewhere in between. He had, across all of that, maintained a relationship with his guitar that was the one constant. the one thread that ran through every configuration of his career and every phase of his public life and every period of his private one. He went back to that thread. In the months following the meeting with Hale, Clapton began working on material that was not shaped by any external framework, not by market analysis, not by demographic data, not by anyone's assessment of what was commercially viable for a man in his late 40s who had been famous for 3 decades. He worked with musicians he trusted in studios where the atmosphere was collaborative rather than directive, on songs that came from the same place his best work had always come from, his actual experience, filtered through the guitar, with nothing between the feeling and the playing, except the craft he had spent 30 years developing. The sessions were, by the account of everyone who was present, unusually good from the beginning. Something had been clarified by the meeting with Hale, not in the way Hale had intended, but in the way that certain kinds of opposition clarify things by forcing you to identify precisely what you are not. Clapton was not a legacy act in need of modernization. He was a musician with something to say, and the question was only how to say it as honestly as possible. Once that question was clear, the work became straightforward in the way that work becomes straightforward when you stop trying to answer the wrong question. The record that emerged from those sessions was From the Cradle, released in September 1994. It was a blues album, entirely, unapologetically a blues album, the music that had shaped Clapton since adolescence, recorded without concession to any contemporary market consideration. It debuted at #1 in both the United Kingdom and the United States. It sold 4 million copies. It won the Grammy Award for Best Traditional Blues Album in 1995. It was, by every measure that Marcus Hale's spreadsheets would have recognized as meaningful, a success, achieved by doing the precise opposite of what Hale had recommended. Hale's name does not appear anywhere on it. Clapton did not speak publicly about the January meeting for several years. When he finally mentioned it in passing, in a conversation with a journalist he had known for a long time, he did not describe it with anger or satisfaction. He described it with the mild interest of someone recounting a minor incident that had turned out to be useful in an unexpected way. He said that Hale had been wrong about almost everything, but that the meeting had been clarifying. That being told with great confidence what he was not had helped him understand, with equal clarity, what he was. He said, "Sometimes the most useful thing someone can tell you is something completely incorrect." The people who were in the studio on the morning of the meeting, the receptionist, 2 recording engineers who had been setting up in an adjacent room and had heard the exchange through the open door, have given various accounts of Clapton's manner as he walked out. They agree on the essentials. He was not angry. He was not dramatic. He moved with the calm, deliberate quality of a man who has made a decision and is comfortable with it. He stopped at the reception desk to thank the woman there for the coffee she had made. He said the studio was a beautiful space. He walked out into the January morning. He had been making music since he was 17 years old. He had survived addiction and grief and the particular, relentless pressure of being considered both a god and a relic by different people simultaneously. He had played through all of it, through the good years and the terrible ones, through the periods when the music came easily and the periods when it did not, through everything that 30 years of a career in the public eye accumulates around a person. He had done it because the guitar was the one true thing, and everything else, including a 31-year-old producer with a spreadsheet and 14 top 10 records, was just the story told around it. He picked up his jacket and walked out of the studio and made From the Cradle. And somewhere in Los Angeles, Marcus Hale opened a spreadsheet and looked at the numbers and did not understand, and probably still does not understand, what had just walked out of his door. If this story moved you, share it with someone who has recently been told they are not enough. Because sometimes the most clarifying thing in the world is someone confidently telling you what you are not. There is a particular kind of confidence that mistakes familiarity with understanding. Marcus Hale was familiar with the music industry in 1994 in the way that someone who has spent 3 years succeeding at something becomes familiar with it, thoroughly, usefully, but within a frame that the success itself has made it difficult to question. He knew what sold. He knew what the data said. He knew how to take an artist who was underperforming relative to their commercial potential and reshape them toward better numbers. These were real skills, and they had produced real results, and they had also, over 3 years, produced in him a confidence that had quietly outgrown its actual basis. What the data could not tell him, what no spreadsheet in 1994 or any other year has ever been able to capture, was what Eric Clapton was, not what he represented commercially, not what his demographic numbers looked like, not where he sat in the market landscape relative to acts that were currently performing well. What he actually was, underneath all of that, a man who had been playing the blues since he was a teenager because the blues was the musical language that most honestly expressed whatever was true inside him, and who had spent 30 years developing the craft to do that with increasing depth and precision. Hale looked at that and saw a legacy act in need of modernization. He saw it with complete confidence because the frame he was using was well constructed and internally consistent and had been validated repeatedly by commercial outcomes. The frame simply did not have room for the thing it was looking at. And when the frame cannot accommodate the thing it is examining, the frame does not always bend. Sometimes it just produces an incorrect conclusion with great confidence. Clapton heard the incorrect conclusion, recognized it as such, said so in 5 words, and left. The 5 words, "I think we're already wasting each other's time," are worth examining because they are not what most people in that situation would have said. Most people would have argued. They would have defended themselves against the Legacy Act characterization, pointed to their track record, asked Hale what exactly he proposed to change and on what basis he thought the changes would work. They would have engaged with the frame, which is what the frame wanted, because engaging with a frame, even to challenge it, gives the frame legitimacy. Clapton did not engage with the frame. He stepped outside it entirely in 5 words and walked out. He did not tell Hale he was wrong. He did not defend himself. He simply indicated, with a brevity that was itself a kind of statement, that the conversation was not one he was interested in continuing. And then he left and went and made the record that the conversation had inadvertently helped clarify for him. From the Cradle is not a record made in anger at Marcus Hale. Hale is not present in it in any way, not as a target, not as a motivating antagonist, not as a ghost to be exorcised. The record exists in a completely different register from the conversation that preceded it. It is a blues record made by a man who understood more clearly after the meeting than before it that the blues was what he was there to play. Not because the market said so. The market in 1994 was not obviously hungry for a straight blues album from a 49-year-old guitarist, but because it was true. Because it was the music that had shaped him and that he had spent 30 years learning to play with greater honesty and precision, and the question of whether the market wanted it was genuinely secondary to the question of whether it was what he had to offer. He offered it. 4 million people bought it. The Grammy committee gave it an award. Marcus Hale's spreadsheets somewhere updated their numbers. None of that is the point. The point is, the Tuesday morning in January when a 31-year-old producer told a 49-year-old musician that he was a legacy act in need of modernization, and the musician listened without expression, said 5 words, stood up, picked up his jacket, thanked the receptionist for the coffee, said the studio was a beautiful space, and walked out into the January morning to go and make exactly the record he had always been going to make. Because knowing what you are when someone tells you with great confidence what you are not is one of the rarest and most useful things a person can know. Clapton knew it. He had known it for 30 years, through everything the career had thrown at him, through all the labels and all the assessments and all the confident, incorrect conclusions that other people had drawn about him across 3 decades. He knew it the way you know the thing that the guitar teaches you when you have been playing it long enough and honestly enough, that the music is the only true thing. Everything else is just the story told around it. He picked up his jacket. He walked out. He made the record. Clapton did not reach out to other producers of Hale's generation. He did not hire a team to analyze his demographic data. He did not issue a public statement about artistic integrity. He did none of the things that a person who wanted to win an argument would do. He went into the studio with musicians he trusted and played the blues. The story is not really about Hale at all. Hale is barely in it. He appears for one meeting, says several incorrect things with great confidence, and exits the narrative entirely. The story is about what Clapton knew about himself, and the particular clarity that arrives when someone who does not understand you tells you with absolute conviction exactly what you are not. Being told you are a legacy act when you know you are not finished is a gift. It removes ambiguity. It shows you the distance between what other people see and what is actually happening inside you. And if you know yourself well enough, if 30 years of honest engagement with an instrument have given you sufficient clarity about what you are there to do, the gift is usable. 4 million copies, #1 in 2 countries, a Grammy on the shelf, and somewhere in Los Angeles, a spreadsheet with Clapton's data that never accounted for what happened next.